Welcome to r/Ask Reddit, where people answer the question, what's a secret you're taking to your grave, but can share here anonymously? Our first reply is from Hello Euphoria. I filed a Child Protective Services case against my own lifelong friend. I went to visit her house after she had kids, and it was a literal biohazard. Animal waste caked into the carpet that was so old it was white. You could smell ammonia from cat pee before you even entered the house. 2 of her girls had awful coughing fits from the poor air quality. Mold, blood, dirt, waste everywhere. I secretly took photos while I was there, and the next day filed a report. My friend called me sobbing that they took her kids from her until she proved she could clean and keep up with the house. I pretended that it wasn't me. She did get the house fixed and got her kids back. Those kids didn't deserve to live in such awful conditions, and I feel no guilt for what I did. But I will never tell her that it was me who made that report. I'd like to add, I did help her fix up her house so she could get her kids back. I love the woman dearly. She just needed some serious mental and physical help. OP, I wouldn't feel guilty either. You definitely did the right thing there. Our next reply is from the Acme Anvil. During the summer of 1964, when I was 12 years old and walking through the library parking lot, I noticed someone left the key in a 1961 Chevy Impala. So I borrowed it for a 10 to 15 minute ride through town. I returned it to the parking lot, but not the same parking spot. Never told anyone before. And then beneath that, a similar story from Roger Trebert. Reminds me of my dad telling me how he took his parents' car out once when he was like 14, pulled up next to his neighbor at a stoplight, and sheepishly waved to her. He thought he was toast, but the other shoe never dropped with his parents. So he thought that the neighbor didn't realize he wasn't 16 and didn't have his license yet. Years pass, and he and my mom end up moving to the neighborhood where he'd grown up, and that neighbor and her husband still live there. He said he'd almost completely forgotten about that. Then one day, they're having a conversation out in the yard when she'd been walking by, and sort of out of the blue, she says something about how she never snitched on him for joyriding. Then this story from You Aren't Really There. My grandparents lived in Colorado. During a visit, my brother and I pushed their car out of the driveway across the grass and spent the night cruising around Denver. When we left, it wasn't snowing. When we got back, inches of snow on the ground. So what was our solution to the tire tracks across the yard through fresh snow? Hey, we got up early and built a snow fort, snowmen, and had a snowball fight. Cleaned off the cars, shoveled the driveway. Is breakfast ready? Never a word was said. Our next reply is from Codefire. When my father had his first heart attack and went into a coma, things were looking really grim. My uncle went to his house and did some snooping under the guise of making sure bills got paid. He found my grandfather's portfolio and discovered that he had just shy of $3 million in savings and investments. What came next was a downward spiral of increasingly vicious infighting and greed over several days as my mom and her siblings went to war with each other over who would get what when he died. And then he got better. Woke up one day, spent months recovering in specialty care, and eventually went home. A few months later, he announced to the family that he'd been semi-conscious the whole time, and decided that they were all getting nothing and that everything was going to charity. A year later, when he had the second heart attack that killed him, the family went into war mode over his money again. That's when they discovered that he had kept his word and donated all but $300,000 before he died. His will donated most of what was left to charity and gave everyone else token amounts. My cousins and I were given $10K each as cash, and his will stipulated that money could be taken from the $300K to pay off any outstanding student loan obligations for myself and my cousins, and anything left over went to the same charity. My mom, aunts and uncles, and his own sister and her kids were all given $100 each. The sole and only exception to all of this was one of my cousins who was raising 3 small children as a widow after her husband was killed in an accident. My grandfather paid off her mortgage before he died and swore her to secrecy. We didn't find out he'd done that until years later. My secret? He was never conscious while he was in that coma. I recorded those arguments on my phone and played them for him once he was healthy enough to listen. I'm the reason none of them got any of his money. He lied to them so they wouldn't attack me when they discovered they weren't getting anything. Our next reply is from Maybe Not Maybe So. In 1994, my best friend and roommate passed away while his extended family was sleeping, and I didn't tell anyone for an hour. He had AIDS, Kaposi sarcoma, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He had not been awake for almost 3 days. 6 months prior, he weighed 170 pounds. When he passed, he weighed under 100 pounds and looked like a skeleton wrapped in paper. A week before he died, his extended family came to stay in our house. His mother, his 2 sisters, and their husbands were all sleeping in the living room and guest bedrooms. It was about 3 a.m., and I'd come to sit with him after going to the bathroom. After about a half hour of just sitting with him, I heard his breathing get shallow and labored. I just held his hand. A half hour later, his breathing stopped altogether. I didn't tell anyone in the moment because his mother would have called 911, started CPR, made him breathe with this breathing bag/mask thing. She had fought with him to get him to stay in the hospital and had been understandably insufferable. He had told me and them that he didn't want any of that. He was so tired, and without the constant morphine, he was in so much pain. I left the room and went back to mine. His sister found him about an hour later. I never told anyone that. I love and miss you, Charles. Our next reply is from Kinjiji. When my mom's brother died, we went to clear out his house. Their sister was so worried about making sure that she got every dime he had, and even though she'd already taken control of his bank accounts, she believed he had hidden money in his house. She came and took all of his guns and searched all over for money. My mother was trying to move his things out, like a normal human being, and I will never forget her sister saying, "To hell with this, find the money!" She finally gave up and left it to my mom, me, and my husband. My son was about 2 years old at the time and doing 2-year-old stuff, and found a jar somewhere in the living room that had $11,000 cash in it. We almost passed out. We stood there stunned. I asked Mom if she was going to tell her sister, and she said, "Yep, when we get to heaven." We split it, and it's still a secret. Our next reply is from No Brain Wreck. When my grandpa died, the relatives wanted to bury him with the family ring on his finger. You know, the family ring that got passed down from generation to generation and was supposed to eventually become mine someday. I didn't care much about getting the ring. It has little, if any, monetary value. But the stupidity of burying a family treasure was, and still is, quite obvious. On funeral day, I stole the ring right from the coffin and hid it in a safe place. It's been decades, and I still keep the ring in a secret place. Someday, I'm gonna pass it to my grandson and tell them the story. Or not. I don't know. Maybe. My precious. Our next reply is from Disney World Native. At a garage sale, my mom bought a small end table that doubled as an enclosed fancy spoon display case. Well, I found there was a lock hidden on the bottom, with a key taped next to it. So I unlocked the case, moved the spoons so they formed 3 X's, relocked the case, and hid the key in my room. This just happened to be on Friday the 13th. It freaked out my family, since no one knew the case opened. Naturally, I would do this randomly. On bad weather days, on Halloween, anniversaries of bad events, days I didn't want to go to school, for most of my childhood. After 10 years, my dad just chucked the table after having enough of everyone screaming and freaking out. Our next reply is from OK Historian. My parents knew that I was being molested by the fire chief of my small town from the ages of 3 to 8. My dad worked for him as a firefighter. My mom was a teacher's aide at my school. Both of them knew, and both of them never did anything to stop it. They let it happen to boost their professional careers in the town. As I got older, I began to remember what happened to me. My parents triangulated my entire family against me and made me out to be crazy and addicted to drugs, when I just smoked weed sometimes. My mom told everyone in town I was addicted to heroin. I never touched hard drugs in my life, never will. They did this so that if the truth was ever to come out, no one would believe me. It was a brilliant and powerful long con. An absolutely evil plan. Meanwhile, I was just a very confused and severely depressed teenager/kid/young adult. I didn't fully remember what happened to me until I was 30. All these little memories and snippets came together through medically assisted therapy. I then went back to my childhood journals and discovered written proof. It broke me. My parents are actually evil and no one else knows. I confronted them through the phone, and they never talked to me again. Sometimes I feel like writing letters to all my family members with the truth. Maybe someday I will. Until then, it stays with me. I've healed. I'm okay. It's just an absolute nightmare knowing my parents trafficked me for their own professional and community comfort, while I had 4 siblings who were treated like normal kids and kept safe. It's disturbing knowing that they're out there hanging out with their grandkids. It's crazy when you find out someone so close to you is actually evil. Our next reply is from Chewbacca Jesus. My best friend committed suicide while we were roommates, as he had a psychotic break and literally stabbed himself to death. I told everyone I was asleep and was only woken by the other roommate's girlfriend, who screamed when she found my friend. In actuality, I was wide awake in my bed, terrified, as I had heard him pacing the house talking to himself or some other entity about how he was going to kill himself with a knife. I literally heard him going through the cutlery talking to someone about what was the best tool to use. I sat in my room with the big hammer in my hand, ready to defend myself. It was absolutely terrifying, and I never told anyone else that I experienced the whole thing. To be clear, he was an incredibly kind human being, and there was only one other time up to this incident where he acted a little strange. But it turns out his family had a history of schizophrenia, and this was likely what happened. A surreal experience, too. When the police showed up, instead of letting us go to the hospital and be with our friend, they interrogated us and acted like we did it. I think it's hard to believe someone would actually stab themselves, but in the end, they let us go see him. Seeing his mom lose her only child was one of the most tragic things I've ever experienced, and the whole thing changed me profoundly. I still miss him dearly. He was an amazing human being. But I still feel like a coward for not going out there and trying to stop him. Our next reply is from Tight Cat. A former friend didn't know that she was pregnant. Delivered at 9 months with cocaine in the baby's system since my friend was constantly blackout drunk, partying, etc. She was 40 years old, for context. I found out that her ex-husband, whom she had an unhealthy attachment to, was still in her life and was convicted of the crime against children that I cannot say the name of on YouTube, and had to register as a sex offender. Child Protective Services was assigned due to the baby being born with cocaine in the system. My friend gave my info and several other friends' info to the Child Protective Services worker for character references. Everyone else lied and didn't mention anything about the ex-husband who was around the child. I told the CPS worker everything. Provided all the court documents I'd found online, showed him on the registry, etc. My friend had her baby removed and was furious. I didn't care because that poor child did not have a mother that was going to protect him, and didn't even have friends of the so-called mother who would look out for him. I berated myself afterwards for what I did and had a mini nervous breakdown, which I worked extensively through with a therapist. As a child of SA by a parent, I refused to pretend this wasn't my problem. Since then, I've cut her out of my life and never looked back. The really weird thing to me is, why would CPS even give the mother a chance if the baby was born with cocaine in its system? To me, wouldn't that be an automatic nullification of parental rights right then and there? Our next reply is from Bezimina. During high school, we were planning a weekend class trip. There was a girl in my class that I greatly respected and liked to hang out with. She was a daughter of a war veteran who had PTSD. He wasn't violent, but had a pretty bad temper. And she had lost her mother to illness when she was just a kid. Regardless of that, she was greatly ambitious, driven, confident, and never, and I mean never, made herself the victim or wanted pity from anyone. Even though we were really different in many other aspects of life, that made me really like and respect her, because I knew how hard her life was. One day, we were talking about the trip, and I was going on and on about how excited I was to go, and she casually said something like, "I'm not going, we don't have the money." Anyways, you know what I saw the other day? I was left speechless. That felt so unfair, and it kept bothering me for the rest of the day, so I decided to do something about it. I knew she was too proud to take money from someone else, and she would get mad if I suggested to borrow her some. So when I got home, I talked to my parents, and my dad told me to ask the teacher to make a deal with the other parents so that we all split the cost, and tell the girl that the travel agency gave us one free spot. And if the other parents wouldn't want to do that, we would pay for her ourselves. I talked to our teacher the next day, told her not to mention my name to anyone, and she talked to all the other parents and everyone agreed. So, to make a long story short, my friend soon received the news about an extra free spot for the trip and was laughing out loud about how she got lucky. She indeed went with us on that trip and had an amazing time. I never told her or anyone else that it was me that made that happen. It wasn't some super duper heroic act, but I still get a rush of happiness when I think about it. And I feel very proud of that 16-year-old version of myself for doing that. Our next reply is from Wise Dot. My husband found a tiny fledgling bird in the backyard. It had obviously had a rough start in life and was missing an eye. We watched it over the course of a week as it practiced taking off from the ground, and its mom delivered worms for it to eat. My husband put out a tray of water for it. We named the fledgling Barney and were really rooting for the little guy. One morning, I went outside to check on Barney, and he was dead. He was on his side, covered in ants. I put him in a box with a flower from the garden and disposed of him. When my husband woke up, he asked about Barney. I told him that earlier that morning, I'd witnessed him take off and fly away with his mom. My husband was so happy and commented that he wished he'd been there to see it. Now, whenever we see a bird of that type nearby, my husband says, "Maybe it's Barney," and he checks to see if it's missing an eye. Our next reply is from Dadbo. I've told many people about this, but no one believes me, so I'm taking this to my grave, I guess. In 9th grade science class, our teacher let us play with a bottle of mercury. One kid opened it up and poured some on his hand. A girl next to him had taken off her rings and wanted to hold it. While she was holding it, the guy took her rings and dipped them in the mercury. They were gold rings, but they came out silver-colored, like the mercury. She thought it was cool and put the rings back on. She developed leukemia our senior year and passed away. It wasn't till many years later in grad school that I remembered this incident and made a correlation. Several kids from that class developed a type of cancer. It may be nothing, but it haunts me. That was r/Ask Reddit, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.